hello, people of the internet, as we have to say. Yes, we're here at this very special lecture series that we started called the Quarantine Live Lecture Series. I guess most of us already are sort of living at home and doing everything at home. We're stuck at home. The home becomes our office, our yoga studio, and it also becomes sort of now the lecture halls of this world. So what we have is a lecture series where we want to continue sharing thoughts and inspiration since we cannot go to the physical lecture halls, but therefore like all of the world can sort of join at the same lecture. So the theme, what we're looking at the moment is the creations beyond the build. So we look at how a drawing can be more than just a technical drawing or like a representation of a building, but actually much more, and that it can show much more worlds. So when we say we, who are we? Maybe for the ones who don't know us, we are Mies TV. We're an international platform of architecture students based in Vienna, in Mexico City, in Paris, in London, and we have a lot of different teams around the world. And we also mainly do documentaries and videos that you can check out on our website. We also always go to the Venice Biennale where we sort of see the global architecture world. So now we go to Portugal, where we have Lara here from Fala Atelier. Usually, you know, there are these long introductions of like the office, but I guess you already all know who Fala is. For the ones who know, welcome. For the ones who don't know, then you're lucky that you tuned in. And she will give us a glimpse into the work of Fala and the approaches of how they work. And then we're gonna have a small talk where you're invited to join. We also have a comment section below on all the streams that we have, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And my colleague Chiara will secretly send me then your questions on my WhatsApp chat, and then we will ask Lara and Fala those questions. So for now, you can already write where in the world you're watching from, and if you had to wake up at 1 a.m. for this live lecture. And yeah, let's get straight into the lecture. And Lara, please, stage is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. This is all very weird, but let's try how things are these days. So yes, my name is Lara, and I am from Fala, and we are, well, we are all here, parts of the office. And this is not going to be, I would say, a typical lecture. You know, it's not a selection of projects in chronological order. It's more of a jump in between things. And today we want to tackle a couple of specific themes to talk about projections and orders. So a small introduction and maybe the first image to kind of to dive into the subject. So the 1 and 3 chairs from Josef Koschet. And well, you know, this is the kind of the usual question and the usual ambiguity of you know, having an object and then having the representations of this object, and then the question of which one is the most important, the question of kind of which one prevails, which one describes it in the most precise way, and then by, you know, clashing this, you know, clashing the object with its representations and definitions, we might be arriving at, let's say, the new meaning. And then, well, as architects, we are, let's say, supposed to think about numbers, to think about rules, to think about proportions, and then there is I don't know, the whole legacy of Alberti and Palladio talking about you know, harmony, symmetry, and all that. This is the drawing from Peter Markley, a sketch of Orient, and you know, Markley is also one of the architects who cares a lot about proportion, who always work with I think parts of 8. But in his case, I think it's also a lot about, it's not just about the order, but also about introducing the disorder, and it's a lot about, you know, the intuition and a bit of a juxtaposition of elements almost. Then comes in the Shinohara, and this is one of the one of the very systematic facades when every exception inside, is introduced still inside a strict grid, and then 3 houses of Shinahara, so kind of a variation of, of the square and the column and the, the slope troop and the clash of elements. Then the meaning space is kind of the anchor point of, I don't know, almost every of his houses. And then this, one of his first renderings, which is also kind of a beautiful representation of looking at the project in this kind of, see-through way when we see each and every element and how they all are, kind of connected and related to each other. Then another drawing from Aida, which is also a nice representation of the, let's say, the layers and overlay of many facades. And to sum up, the drawing of well, I have it, a name because I can never remember it, of Kitagawara as a kind of a strange and conflicting arrangement of elements, again within a given volume, a given perimeter. So and now to the, let's say, to the main chapter, orders and projections, which is one. It's something that we are always aware of as an office, but it is also, let's say, one of the latest fascinations or obsessions of ours, and we are trying also to reflect a bit on that. And I think let's say the first need, to impose a certain order, a certain grid, and a game of rules within a project, it came because of the simple fact that many projects, they were renovations. So we had to work with what was already there, and what is already there is usually kind of a nasty condition, a chaos of rooms, walls and partition, and annexes in the backyard. And kind of the first step in almost every project is to demolish everything and to erase the existing condition somehow. So this is one of the examples. It was also a renovation, and it was a former factory that had to be transformed into a house. And from this plan, we after demolishing everything, we ended up with a rectangular perimeter and this simple structure, which is a beam and 3 columns on every level. And the logic in the beginning was a bit strange for us, because the structure, it's not exactly in the middle. We were questioning the position of these elements, but then it it became a starting point for the logic of the plan. So we the structure and this beam with 3 columns, it became the departing point for the plan to follow. And then within this, we draw the line in the middle. We separate the wall of all the bedrooms, and this wall is a little bit behind the structure, and then there is the grid of 6 squares. So that's the rule that came up to the structure and within the given perimeter. And then within the pink line, we introduce a few exceptions, which are the 2 triangular bathrooms, then the curve of the guest bathroom sort of, and then the straight wall to separate the staircase, and a few kinks to place all the pipes and things. And then the rigid grid of the 6 squares is kind of projected on the facade, and the facade is kind of also a very, I don't know, banal and organized system. It's basically the repetition of the same window with a few adjustments and exceptions. And then also on the inside, we realized that this is one of the plans that can almost never be read when you are inside the space, but at the same time, the sequence of the blue doors that comes from the 6 bedrooms kind of still gives you the idea of what is happening inside the volume. And this is, let's say, this is the game of perimeters, rules, exceptions, and grids. It's kind of happening in every project somehow, and it doesn't matter if it's a renovation or if it's a new structure. Let's say the same process of trying to to create the perfect system and the perfect order within a few exceptions, of course. The same game, is being played all the time. So another example is is our first house actually, and this one was a new construction. And we of course started with a square, and this is also something that we are kind of trying to run away with now, but let's see if we manage. And in this case it was a house, so we call it a house with 3 generations. So we were supposed to have three bedrooms and of course a living space. And I hope you can see all the lines, but one of the first step was, you know, to divide the square into 4 parts, and then the three of these parts, they sort of become bedrooms and all the secondary programs. Then again, the exception is introduced, so one of the bedrooms remains a square, and then the other one is a triangle, and the third one is the quarter of the circle, and then the space, kind of the remaining space, becomes the weirdly kind of shaped living room. And then in the intersection of the 2 yellow axes, we place the column that is not a structural column, but kind of this purely architectural element that kind of, you know, marks the space and kind of makes you kind of, it establishes, let's say, the spatial hierarchy, and the way you circulate around it, it becomes the anchor point of that room. And yes, the final plan that is working within the system that we imposed. So the image of the space, and you see the 2 of the 3 bedrooms. You see the column, and the column is one of the elements that we are quite quite fascinated with, which is also a very basic element of architecture. And I will probably say the word elements a lot, because this is also one of the current, let's say, fascinations at the office, and it's an ongoing research and a reflection on our own work somehow. And you see the 2 images of the two columns, the 2 concrete columns that don't touch the ceiling. Those are in 2 different projects, and maybe one column is more of a a delicate one. It's not in the very center of the living room. It's off-centered, and then it gravitates towards towards one of the wall, while the other one is positioned in, well, the other one, it has 4 columns within the project, but every room has a concrete column positioned exactly in the middle, and it's a heavy totem within this very tall and square space. And column is something that happens in many projects of ours for different reasons, and I think we are almost trying to steal the column as a structural element from all the structural engineers, and we are trying to make it a purely architectural element somehow. In every project the column gets a different meaning and a different expression, and a different materiality and all that. So another duo of projects and another weird similarity. So in this case we have the column that holds the center of both projects. So in this case the column is actually a chimney. There is a fireplace on the ground floor, and then the column goes through the entire building. And the other one is a house that is also evolving around the column, that has a very weird outline because of the doors opening towards the center, but both of them are punching through the entire building, connecting all the levels together. And those columns, they are striving for this logic within the project, for the continuity and for the integrity of the full system. And you can see the 2 very simple sections, and the funny difference is that in this case the doors are opening from the column, and in case of the second project the doors are opening towards the column. And I think you can see that on both collages, which is the same but also different, and it's it's a strange. The 2 projects are a bit of strange cousins of each other somehow, and they both are being built. And so in this case the column is a chubby chimney on every level, and in this case the column, well, it doesn't touch the ceiling of the floor of the living room. So it's a kind of a suspended house that flies on this concrete column. And the two drawings that are exactly about, about this connection of all the levels, about the kind of the system, and about the plan, that is projected through the entire building. And it's not, when it comes to systems and projections, it's not about always, extruding the plan over all the levels, but it can also be about the, let's say, the section or the elevation. And if in case of the column or the wall, it's, it's about an element that goes through the full height of the building. Then in case of elevation, it's more about the kind of the envelope that goes around the building. Well, this is one of the examples. It's also a recent project of ours, and the facade in this case, well, the facade is always, a bit of a projection of the plan, of course, but at the same time, it plays its own game. And in case of this project, we were lucky, to get one of these huge side facades that kind of, almost becomes a billboard, and eventually a building is going to be built on the site probably, but until it's not, we decided to kind of to take advantage of having that much of a surface. And facade in this case kind of became the the system of layers of materials and dots and lines and textures and plasters and marble stones, and it's a clash of these systems, and these drawings, they are simply layers of all of it. And then the final image is this kind of strange pattern, but within the pattern, every layer has its own logic, and then it's also about deciding if the two layers are kind of conflicting with each other or if they're trying to match. And then the facade can also be so it can either be, let's say, some kind of a rigid system, a very ordered and normal building, or it can be a canvas. So it can be almost a compositional exercise of precisely arranging all the elements. And in case of this project, it's a house, and it's almost this is the main elevation of the house. And in this case, it's again a game of of very classical elements. So the beam on top, then the little plinths to detach the building from the ground. Then there is the chimney on one side, the column on the other one, the tall door to mark the main entrance, the big window, and the little circle. And the elements, they are never randomly placed. You see that the window, is in the exact, I don't know if you can see the mouse, but the window is in the exact middle, then the little circle is aligned, and all that. It's never random. And the image of the house being built. And this is also one of the, let's say, one of the differences between projects that we have to work with. If in case of the house, it's it's more about the volume and how the four facades again are somehow wrapped around the building. In many cases, we have to work with just with this dichotomy of the two facades, having the street one and the back one, because the building is always in between. And this is also another, let's say, another game of how you relate between the two and how you kind of connect the two, so you read them as I don't know, as one project. And this is actually the project is our office, and it's another example of let's say, connecting the three levels, but not within the, let's say, not within the plan or the spatial logic, because the three levels are quite different, because it's an office space, and then it's two very different apartments above. I'm trying to make it half an hour. My colleagues are telling me that I'm being too fast. But yeah, let's say the way we connect the three levels in this case is more, it's not by repeating the same wall or the same column, but in this case it's even the simple fact that the pattern is kind of repeated on all the level, and it goes through the full thing, and then a few structural elements are also going through. Then then the beam is repeated on both levels, so it's more it's more about the the architectural element or the structural column and the kind of the materiality of the whole thing that holds the project together. And in case of many projects, we have to figure out the, let's say, the way to conceive 4 different rooms or 5 different spaces, within the same vocabulary of elements. And in this case, it's a small residential buildings. It's a small residential building, and the four apartments were exactly kind of managed this way. We have the pink door, we have the green door, we have the curvy surface, and we have the stepped surface that kind of separates the living space and the bathroom. Another example, but this is not about this one is not about, let's say, repeating the same element. This project is more about, let's say, a variation on one on one housing unit. So this one is about kind of designing 6 houses within the same logic of materials and elements, but at the same time, with a few variations. So this one is more about, let's say, the variation within the same typology and within the same materiality. And those are the 2 different apartments, and you see that, let's say, the geometries are not repeated, and kind of the volume of the space, the outlines, they are different, but at the same time you read them as kind of as part of one project, and the same happens above. This one is probably the climax of, let's say, this idea of a variation of one apartment, and in this case it's 15 variations of one apartment within a box. And I think the very idea of kind of wanting to do these variations again comes from the fact that there is always kind of a given perimeter or a given volume that we have to obey, that we have to keep. And then, let's say, within the perimeter, we kind of start acting a bit crazy, and then we are trying to avoid the repetition, and we are kind of striving for the weird volumes and, I don't know, clashes and conflicts of elements. And simply by kind of adjusting the concrete slab, or by introducing a pink line column in this case, so the plan you see again, it's kind of a very rigid grid with a few exceptions that mostly happen, when the staircase happen. But through the section, we were trying to achieve this this set of almost extreme variations within a small apartment. But at the same time, again, it's always about the rule and exception. At the same time, within all the variations, you read the same materiality through the project, the same pavement, the same system of the cabinet, the same concrete ceiling, and then with a few exceptional elements that are, again, occasionally and precisely introduced. Another project, this one is a house, but in this case, the variation it's not even in this case the variation comes from kind of it's not even a variation, it's a repetition of the same room, and it's a game of breaking the scale of the house. So it's a house of of split levels. Again, you have the given perimeter, you have the staircase in the middle, and then you have a few exceptions that are introduced within the plan to separate the bathroom and the cabinet and all that. And then the scale of the house is very much broken, because instead of having, I don't know, 1 or 2 windows within a room, we almost doubled, and we multiplied a lot the amount of windows, and then the facade is kind of confusing you about what's happening on the inside. So it's we even counted these windows, but it's a house of, I don't know, 56 windows or so, and then the street facade and the back facade are almost identical. And seeing the 2 next to each other is also a good example of how the scale of the window of the opening can be confusing, because this project that you see now, it's much bigger, and it's another let's say example of working within a given perimeter. So this one is a set of 5 apartments, 5 duplexes, if you can call them so. And The five of them, let's say, they are kind of they're trying to be one house. They are within one volume, and they act as one building. And the facade in this case is also a funny exercise of kind of applying a pattern and an ornament on top of a distorted perimeter, a distorted box. So it's kind of a step-by-step intervention. Again, we start. There's always the finishing, the cornice. There's always the base of the building, and then there is the very simple grid of windows, which again respects the grid of the plan, the very regular sequence of identical rooms. Then a small details of balconies. Then again, the ornament on top to kind of as a layer of complexity on top of the white box in the suburbia. Another line of black marble stone. Then the doors, they're trying to break the system, so the entrances, they become the exception. They don't follow or adjust to what is there. And then the finishing line is the set of circles of pink marbles on top of that. And yeah, the drain pipes and the curtains. And this is a kind of one of the comprehensive drawings that we always do, which is again kind of an attempt to sum up the project, the two levels that are in a way two opposite systems. They kind of, do I have the, yeah, so the plan is very much kind of depending on the distorted perimeter, but then again we are trying, within the sequence of room above, we are trying to introduce a system that is projected on both levels. But then again, the ground floor becomes more of an open space because it's a living room and the kitchen, and then the space above is much more kind of intricate and complex because it's a set of bedrooms and small programs. But then the circulation space is actually becoming, the definitive space of the project somehow. And it's again kind of, it has a few elements that are always repeated. There is the skylight, there is the beam column, and then there are the kind of the two surfaces of the ceiling and the very present marble floor. And then the white walls, they become the kind of the change in elements in this game because they always follow the slightly different geometry, and they are kind of the dynamic elements of this game. Another comparison of two projects that are kind of very different, but at the same time quite similar to each other somehow. So one is both are renovations, but one is no, they are both houses actually. Yeah. So the two of them, but one is let's say one is a separate building, and then the other one is kind of the ground floor of the apartment block. And those are the images of the two main spaces, let's say. And you can see that, again, the two spaces are very much defined by kind of the two surfaces of the floor and the ceiling that quite often have a different materiality in, I would say, most of our projects. And then the kind of the geometry of the white wall that is usually separating the main space from the secondary program becomes the active and the definitive element of the space. And so those are the two drawings kind of explaining the geometry. In case of the first house, it's a curvy wall with with a sequence of blue doors and a few openings. And in case of the other one, it's a very it's a broken wall that is also kind of trying to hide the secondary program and adjust to what is behind. And a few details that are kind of, again, for us, this is this kind of the very idea of all the projects somehow, evolving around the same sort of elements, the same materiality. And we are kind of always talking about the fact that all the projects in the end, they are islands of this archipelago, and they become one kind of massive project. And the two facades, well, the two back facades, they are quite different, but at the same time, they are, let's say, correct projections of the two plans. And the two, let's say, zoom outs of the two projects, they are those strange projections of this project towards the outside. So and then we are also circulating about this idea of, I don't know, every project being a weird misfit, a cutout in the environment, not in the environment, in the context, in the neighborhood, but we are also quite let's say, fond of the idea that by being, by not belonging, in the end, the project kind of it becomes, I don't know, a very proud element, and let's say, it's kind of, it changes the context a bit, and it's, let's say, it's never submissive. It's kind of, it's almost trying to impose its own rules on top of what is happening there already. And one more duo, the last one, I think. I hope I'm not too long. No, it's fine. So the two houses, the two projects that were built from scratch, and of course both projects are squares, because this is the only way we can start, and this is the most correct perimeter that we can dream of. And the two, let's say, the two houses, they of course have similarities, but the two of them are kind of, they approach maybe different, of course they approach different specialities and also different ways to kind of to define the house and the houseness. And I already talked about the first one, this idea of having the dividing the square into 4 parts, and then the 3 bedrooms, and then the very direct relationship between the secondary program and the living room, because you enter directly from your bedroom. But then the other house is more about let's say, dividing the plan, the volume, into 2 parts, and then one of them becomes the living room, the public space, and then the other ones are bedrooms. But in this case, they are kind of accessed through the 2 hallways. And then, if in this case, it's more about this very direct exception, so you have the triangle and the circle. And in case of the other one, it's more about kind of these little delicate kinks and exceptions that also happen kind of for strange reasons, or for very normal reasons actually, when the client want I don't know, a cabinet or more kitchen or a bit more storage space, or when we need to kind of to include the full window. So it's kind of a strange set of reasonable exceptions. So the two plans as they are. The 2 facades that were kind of, we never meant them to look alike, but at the same time, you clearly spot, there is the white wall, there is the white canvas, then there is one square window, there is one little circular window, and then there is kind of the beam in one case and the concrete roof in the other case, as kind of as a way to finish the composition somehow. And again, as in case of almost every project, the 2 houses, they never belong, but then they kind of they slowly adjust within the given context. And the images of the 2 spaces, which are also quite different. If in case of the first house, I would say it's more of a kind of an extrusion of the plan, and the geometry of the space, it's a result of this abstraction, and then it's in between 2 horizontal surfaces. But then the other house, it's very much about the roof and this very present ceiling and the structure of the wooden beam. So it was more about also exploring the volume, and then having the highest space in the living room, and then the lowest in the other side of it, and the axos of the 2 space that are radically different in the end. And the two comprehensive drawings. So in a way, yeah, it's a game of assembling the two houses out of not necessarily similar ingredients, but they definitely share some similar qualities. And then to finish, let's say it's kind of coming back to the first image of 1 and 3 chairs from Joseph Koschut, and it's our constant and obsessive research on on how to let's say, how to design the project, how to draw the plan in the most in the most precise way. And so this series of drawings is also one of the recent discoveries, let's say, when every wall or every system of walls has a color and has a meaning. So the black line is the perimeter, which is either given or invented one. Then the blue line is always the rule, and then the pink line is always the exception. And then you see that all the divisions, all the game of proportions and grids, it's always there as an extra layer on top of all of that. But then it's also like we don't apply this just to the plan. You know, the kind of these systems, these sequences and orders, they also happen, and you are able to read them through, you know, through every section as the column, you know, that kind of goes through the entire building. It's kind of holding it together, or, you know, this sequence of blue doors that is again a projection of the 6 rooms that you have in the plan. Or as in case of this house, it's kind of, you know, it's almost, it's actually a repetition of the same house, but 3 times. Then the drawings that are, let's say, kind of a bit simplified versions of elevations, but again, for us, those are not about precision, but those are about, let's say, drawing the portrait of the building, and kind of again trying to depict the facade in the most again, in the most kind of, I don't know, essential way, in the to be as kind of as precise as possible in defining the project. And then, of course, you know, taking pictures of the space. And we always work with the same photographer, with Ricardo Loureiro, and within these photos, we are able to check upon the project, to see the detail and the perspective of the space and all that. So photography is also one of the crucial tools that we are kind of trying to control, but at the same time, it's one of these points, you know, when the project is finished and the person moves in. And to sum things up, this is a quote from Tibor Giornelli, that he wrote a text on us in the Tucci magazine, and he actually, I think this text was actually the beginning of this of the reflection on systems and projections and all of that. And well, yeah, he talks about the fact that you know, the plan or elevations, they are projected either vertically or horizontally through the whole buildings, and they those projections somehow, although they are not, you know, strictly necessary, they kind of become the reason that holds the building together. Somehow they become the anchor of the project. And this is it. So thank you.
Great. I hope.
I hope. But
no, it's great. Sorry about this whole audio issue, technology, but we're getting there. After a few more weeks of coronavirus, we'll all be internet experts.
we will master the internet, yes,
all around the world. All right. To those people still watching, and there are a few watching, I can see. If you have any questions to Lera and to Fala Atelier, just put them down in the comment section anywhere. And we will try to get your question now live to Portugal and ask our super elaborate intellectual questions. I'm gonna start maybe with like the first question, super basic, but looking back to the beginning of Fala, was this always the approach that you had in the office from the very beginning, or was it something that you sort of developed over years and years?
I think in the beginning it was actually even a bit more extreme, because when we look back to some of our competitions, I think in the beginning there was a much stronger obsession with grids, and I think we were a bit more reluctant to introduce all the exceptions. But I think today we are, of course, it's changing and evolving, but I think some of these rules and intentions, they were already there, and I think it is also explained a lot by, you know, by all the references that are on the table, and from which we kind of will learn and take inspiration from somehow. So it's kind of there, but then it's changing, and I think we're having much more fun and much more freedom also somehow while designing.
Speaking of references, actually our colleague from Vienna, Teresa, asked the question if any specific art references that play a role in your work.
Well, I would say there are maybe a couple of names. So there is an occasional mentioning of Ellsworth Kelly, and there is one one day there was a discovery of Daniel Buren, and I think this is when our fascination for stripes began. And but yeah, those are the two names I think. Speaking of the art ones. But the rest is almost purely architectural.
In Japan, and I guess you know, there is this word of kawaii for cute. Um,
Mm-hmm.
do you see your work as cute?
Uh, Cute. But let's say cuteness is never it's never the intention. But that no, it might be cute, but I think it's it was never the intention of the I think the right word for us is joyful, while let's say touching this aspect of the project.
Because I mean, you got super famous with this digital collages. So famous
But
you
it's
don't.
only, it's only because there is the touch of pink, and then the cat on the carpet. No, those are the two ingredients of cuteness of these collages. Well, we cannot deny them, but yeah, they they are there.
So for all the students, just put cats in pink in, and it will give you a better position. Um, but why do you think there's such a big interest nowadays for these type of presentation of architecture, the way you do it?
Mm, the interest. I don't know. There is too much internet, maybe. No, but I think it's also in our case. It was actually a very how do you say a very practical decision almost, because we are incredibly bad at renders, and the collage in a way was a way to kind of to save ourselves somehow. It's a very imprecise way to depict the project somehow, but it can be very it can be very right in terms of in terms of depicting the I don't know the character of the building, or the let's say the kind of the atmosphere of the space. It's I don't know, it's a way to see how the actual space, in the right perspective, can be inhabited and can be lived in. So it's for us, it has to do a lot with the intuition of the project. And but I would also say that the collages that we were doing 5 years ago, and then the collages and the perspective that we are experimenting with now. So even within the tool of the collage, we are trying to evolve and trying to tackle some different themes and aspects of the project. So, but let's say for us also the important thing is to always be aware of the meaning of the tool, of how you use it, and to kind of to run away of the simple cuteness of the image.
There's a very pragmatic question from Arion on YouTube, who said, how do you work with the construction company or craftsman to make sure that the concept and details get through into the real building? Do you prepare detailed plans, or does it just happen on the spot?
No. Of course, there is the whole chapter of execution drawings, and then the utmost precision. And I mean, we are not masters of detail, I would say, but we are kind of working with what we can work with somehow. And then there is also the aspect of us controlling the kind of every step of the construction site and going there all the time and checking and correcting the mistakes. There is always a moment of when something goes wrong, and we have to improvise a bit and to adjust a small aspect of the project. And sometimes those improvisations, they I don't know, they actually add the richness. Sometimes there is the unexpected column that was not supposed to show up, but then it's there. So we also enjoy these mistakes and these corrections that have to happen in the end. But yeah, we try to kind of to control every step of the process.
Wow, very very pragmatic questions here on YouTube. Matt Health is asking the the beauty of your project seems to be related to the finesse of your design. How do you manage the building's durability? Does this kind of design require extra maintenance?
No, I wouldn't say so. We don't do any I don't know, any elaborate or fancy construction of structures. You know, we work with brick and concrete, then plaster and the capoto system on top. So it's all very kind of very easy and simple. I think it's kind of it's the way you put the elements that you have together and add a few awkward details on top. But there is no maintenance or issues with the. Of course, sometimes there is a problem of a leaking skylight, but we are learning to deal with those as well.
Then Nino Kallio is asking also from YouTube regarding the client. What is the relation between Fala and the client? How do you approach such a specific
very
design?
painful. Well, we so our clients are very normal people. We you know, while studying, we all dream about building a house for a writer or a painter. Well, this never happens. So we I don't know, we work with families and couples, and our clients, they are, well, they almost know nothing about architecture. They don't know the name of Fala, and in the beginning they almost come because they don't know how to, you know, how to deal with the bureaucratic part of, I don't know, signing all the papers about the plot or whatever. So it's, you know, it's a lot about the boring side of filling all the papers and submitting it in the municipality for the permit. But within this communication, we are, let's say, for us, every client is a challenge and a great opportunity, and we dive into that. We also lose a lot of clients because sometimes we push things way too far, and they want a traditional Portuguese house or a strange contemporary one with, I don't know, with boxy volumes popping out. So there are many sides to it, but I think we are trying as much as possible to kind of to pick the battles, to give them what they want, and then while they have what they want, kind of behind this, we are trying to have fun and to find joy in doing all that. So it's a lot about also educating the client and learning to work with them, explaining that the white wall is as good as a beige one. So there are many aspects and painful stories about it, but we are also learning to work with that.
Speaking of Portugal, so the context where you are, Malti001 asked, would the architecture still look the same if the project contexts were very different? I think the reason why the Fala hues, pastels, really work is because of the Mediterranean context and climate. But do you think it would be all different if you would be in, I don't know?
One of the things that we always that we have people saying about us. So in Portugal, people say that Fala is not Portuguese at all, but then from the outside world, they say that Fala is very Portuguese. But I think we are normally quite ignorant towards the context. I don't know, many times I think it also comes from the, you know, in the beginning of every office career, you work on a lot of competitions that are always in, I don't know, in Norway, in Switzerland, so they are never in your hometown. So you kind of you learn to work with a context that you haven't seen, that you haven't visited, and maybe this is also one of the initial reasons. But I think we are never submissive. We are never submissive to it. We almost in many cases we even start working on a project, you know, before we do the actual site visit somehow. So I think, and also I think maybe in many cases the context that we have to work with is also you know, as said, Portuguese suburbia. So I think for us it's more of a challenge of introducing let's say, a proud object within within the given condition somehow.
Then if we just add to this, where did my question go? On Facebook, Josie Ringleben is asking, it appears that your designs give a breath of fresh air into the context. However, do you ever receive pushbacks from the community because it's different?
So, but I think it's also important to kind of to distinct between the so the breath of fresh air is one thing, but we are not trying to kind of to land also in alien objects. So I think we are talking about a kind of a delicate and a softer kind of a softer version of being a misfit. It's not about doing something completely crazy and irrational in the given condition. So I don't know, the house still looks like a house. It doesn't look like a typical Portuguese house with I don't know, boxes and balconies or whatever. So and in this sense, I think it's not a pushback from the community, but of course sometimes every project is submitted to municipality, and sometimes we have to take a step back, or before even doing the design, we have to keep in mind certain regulations and certain rules that we of course have to follow. So it's not a complete improvisation. It's there is always kind of a system of limitations, and then every project is an attempt to make the best out of these limitations and kind of to take an advantage of those rules that we have to follow.
And now there's kind of a very philosophical question regarding like the context and Fala buildings. On YouTube, Nuno Pinto e Costa is asking, it seems that your larger scale work are always more quite rigid, along a grid, not a lot of exceptions, and the smaller scale are more like outcasts. And now the philosophical question, how do you think two different works by Fala will dialogue side to side? So imagine if you build a big house and then the adjacent lot, which is smaller, got free, and you have to build something there.
But we almost have a couple of those sites when the projects are next to each other, but they're usually the same scale. But this is also a very precise observation, and it has a very good reason, because when the project is small, you are just simply able to control more things and to dedicate a bit more attention to all the detailing. When the larger scale project is more about sequences and repetitions and all that. But I think this is the answer to that would be what I already kind of said somehow, because I think as an office we are very interested in this idea of having a consistent language, but at the same time we don't want to to always stick to that language. To us, language is also it's a work in progress, so it's something that we are exploring. And we have a small career so far. It's only 6 years, but I think we also quite curious to see, let's say, where will this language take us. And for now, all the projects are also they are small scale projects, so we would be curious to try the vocabulary that we have, the grammar and all the tools, and try to apply them to a bigger building and see how we can handle that somehow. But I think it's also important to distinct. So I think we are not very comfortable with the word style, because we are not aiming at a style or at the the recognizable aspect of it. I think it's really kind of the language, the vocabulary, and the grammar of architecture that we are after somehow.
Okay, I just had to rewrite the question now. Ryan Garza is asking, you seem to commonly work with very small building footprints in a lot of your projects. How do you think your language, vocabulary, and grammar would translate to a proposal of a much larger scale?
But I don't have an answer to that, because we haven't tried it yet. We are like, our projects are slowly getting bigger, and as I was saying, the bigger projects, they are more about kind of, repetition of certain elements, and they require maybe more rules, and we are always very keen on kind of, on keeping it consistent, and therefore the theme of, systems and orders, and kind of trying to control every little aspect of it. But still, within the even bigger block, we are kind of we don't want to design, I don't know, 15 or 30 apartments that are the same. So we are still kind of trying to explore all the possibilities, and to kind of to have an added layer of complexity and the spatial richness, and some kind of the set of variations within one building.
Let's get back to like the physical things, the material. Metaphysics for Breakfast is asking on YouTube. You mentioned choosing some materials and elements and using them throughout different projects. And is it purely aesthetical, representational reasons, or are there technical motivations behind it?
So I think when it comes to materials, there is also like a process of change and development, and some kind of evolution is happening. Because if you go to like a few very first Fala projects, it had white walls, wooden floor, and blue doors, or a marble floor. And I think it was the first attempt, and right now we are kind of exploring a palette that is much richer. I don't know, the ceiling is never white anymore, and then we are kind of, it's not just about the famous blue. So there are pink moments, there is green, there is yellow. So there is an exploration of kind of every aspect of it. Different kinds of marble, different kinds of colors, different kind of wooden patterns for the floor. So I think we are also, it's about, gaining a bit more freedom and certain liberation from that. In one of the exhibitions that we did, we even did green walls with pattern on top of that. So I think we are kind of slowly trying to get a bit more free and a bit more crazy even. But I would also say that every material kind of, it appears, then it stays for a certain period, and then we might get tired of that, and then it disappears, and then a new one comes in. So it's a palette that is always, again, changing and evolving, and turns into something different eventually, and it's becoming more and more complex.
Perfect. You already answered Mirella Gancheva's question about rules and exception and the color palette of Fala. But speaking of rules and exception, Daniela Lampis is asking, you mentioned the room, the rule, and the exception. So is the exception coming from the rule? Is it just a gesture inside the grid? Is there any programmatic functional reason behind the exception?
I think it can be both. In case of the two houses that I showed, in case of the first one, the exception happened there was no practical reason for that. It happened more, I think, as an intention to design the main space that is a bit more, that is kind of a bit more rich and complex. And in case of the second house that I showed with smaller, kinks and broken walls and tilted angles. So it was more about adjusting, we need 2 more cabinets here, we need a bit more space in the bathroom, we need, the little niche for the shower. So it was kind of this small list of practical reasons that kind of came from the client, and we had to work within that. And through the practicality of that, the plan actually became a much more sophisticated game somehow. But I think we are allowing ourselves to be unpractical. So we don't need always a wall of cabinets behind the partition. So it can be both.
Then we have, wow, so many questions. That's super nice from all around the world. Maybe also write where you're writing those questions from, so we know how big this Fala globe is at the moment. So Zaul Hussein Zada is writing, love them all. any projects in the future with recycled hard materials?
Well, the ecology moment. Let's say we never had a client come into us and asking to do a project out of recyclable or I don't know ecological materials. So we never had to deal with it. But I think if the moment comes, we are sure that we will be able to work within that strategy as well. But no, so far concrete and brick, all the evils of this world.
Let's get to the ways of working or like approach. Simao Jorge from YouTube is asking, how do you approach a new project, and are there specific steps that you always take?
So, I mean, there is always, of course, a bit of a, I don't know, site plan or a plot research on, I don't know, to figure out all the regulations. For instance, if it's a house, we need to know all the, I don't know, all the rules, all the offsets, all the height limits that we are following. So this is there. We know our limitations, and then within the system of all the rules, we are starting to try things, and I think we are also the office that in the beginning we have to try a lot of options and a lot of possibilities. Then there is also the client aspect, and we know what is let's say what is the request, what is the expectation that they have. So there are many sides and many directions that we need to put together in one project. But I think one of the things, it's always about the kind of trying many possibilities with the volume, and then through this set of many, we are kind of starting to narrow down the list somehow. I don't know, from 25 to 5, and then from 5 to 1, and then when we have the 1, then there is always, I don't know, a series of variations within the one volume or one limit. So it's a lot about trial and error somehow, and it's also a lot about the kind of trying to follow all the regulations, all the requests, all the square meters that we have to put in. So it's a very complex exercise, and it comes from kind of a lot of parts and fragments that have to be put together. And maybe this is also one of the I think one of the reasons that is behind the fact that our architecture is kind of, I think it can be described as a fragmented or divided one somehow. So it's I'm trying to put all the things together.
Speaking of many ideas, let's talk about many brains. Luna Buganem and Luna Mays have sort of the same question about how do you work in this collaboration that you are, because you're many people at Fala. How does the evolution work? Does everyone grow in the same direction, in the same way? And how do all those different brains then get to this result?
Well, I think we are a team of 10. Well, now we are a reduced version of that, but if there is no virus, we are 10 people. And well, one of these people is an engineer, so he has his set of responsibilities. Then we usually have a couple of interns who are in the beginning helping out and learning from us, but then in the end of 9 months they can almost take care of of a small scale project. And then the 6 of us, 7 of us, I think. So there is Philippa and Ahmed, who are the 3 partners, and they probably are mostly in the client department or teaching or figuring out all the emails. But then at the same time, they are kind of curating the whole process. And then so 10 minus 3 minus 3, so 4 more people. We are I would say quite. So we have our set of responsibilities and kind of strong qualities, but at the same time, I think we are all quite flexible, and we can kind of shuffle in between projects and between small missions. And then it's also a very nice scale of the office, because in the end, everyone is capable of following up on every project. And then there is constant switching in between projects, and it's chaotic, but at the same time, it's nice and cozy.
we have a beautiful question from Texas, USA, at lunchtime. Ryan Garza is asking, what would the Fala office of today say to the Fala that was just starting out?
Our office of today, the Fala was just starting out. I mean, we always say that we are a naive young office, and I think that probably the naive part is is slowly evaporating. But I think we are like one of the goals or one of the intentions that we still have is, you know, is this the very romantic side of having a lot of enthusiasm for architecture, of having a lot of passion, and you know, this kind of very joyful approach to work, and yeah, always keeping the fresh and naive mind, even after, I don't know, all the painful meetings in the municipalities and having to talk to clients and all that. So I think we want to always have the joyful, youthful side with us.
So speaking about joyful, youthful in this not so joyful times, how is it like for you at the moment? Like as a young architecture practice in Europe that's sort of having all these restrictions, what's your take on this?
Well, we are some of us are still coming to the office, which is very helpful. I think otherwise we would go crazy. But we are going back in time a bit now. We are taking on much more competitions again because we have time, because some of the construction sites or some of the projects, they stopped, or they put a pause button on. So we are back to working on schools and kindergartens in Switzerland, and then we are trying to find a few more competitions to keep ourselves occupied. And well, you know, now there is the chapter of all the online lectures and all the teaching, so we are also exploring that. But it's I mean, I don't know, I think it's not as dramatic here, so we are still in good spirits.
Great. Okay, and then the most beautiful last question that I will ask for today is by Ivan Simotti, who asked, "Are you hiring? LOL."
Are we hiring? Well, I think are the borders closed? I'm not sure. No, not yet, but we will, because every year we have interns. So now is the time when all the applications fly in. So use the chance to send one.
Perfect. Great. Okay. I think that was it. Yes, we have most of the questions covered. Thank you so much, Lera, for your talk.
Thank you
for your answers.
It was fun and weird.
And yeah, it was pretty weird, this whole experience, but I think it's gonna get less and less weird with all the further lectures you will give.
Yeah, that's the future.
With all the lectures that we will do. The next lecture is gonna come up next week, and we're gonna look on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Just stay on Mies TV on Facebook, Instagram. You can see who the next lecturer are. And yeah, thank you again to Portugal from Vienna, and have a nice evening. Yeah, it's already evening in Portugal. To the rest of the world, good night or good morning, and see you again next week. Obrigado.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.